When James's dog Daisy wouldn't stop barking at an old bee nest in the basement, he decided to cut it open. She was obviously afraid of it, and James just didn't understand why. This nest had been there for years already, and she had never even looked at it before. However, when he finally cut it open, he got the shock of his life. His eyes widened with fear, and he screamed for help. How did this end up in his house? Police finally arrived, but James was still completely in shock by what he had found. He couldn't believe it. Daisy had been right to warn him since the beginning. It didn't take long before even the police understood the situation and called for backup. But what had James found in the nest? Why did it scare him so much, and why did he scream for help? But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. James looked up from his newspaper as he heard his dog, Daisy, barking. She was a very calm and peaceful dog, and she barely ever barked. The only time she did so was when she was afraid of something, so it definitely caught his attention. He looked around the living room, but he didn't see her there. He stood up and walked to the kitchen, but that was empty too. Besides, the barking sounded as if it was coming from someplace further away. He looked around and wondered, where could Daisy be? James suspected she was in the garden. He knew Daisy was scared of bigger insects like grasshoppers and moths, and also mice and certain birds. "Daisy! Come here, girl," he called her. He whistled, clapped, snapped, clicked his tongue, and made all the sounds that usually made Daisy come to him, but this time, none of them worked. This was very unusual, as Daisy was very well trained. What was going on down there? James thought to himself. He decided to check it out for himself. He walked down the stairs and he saw Daisy barking at something in the corner. "Hey girl, what is it? What have you got there?" he asked her. His dog, however, completely ignored him and continued barking. She was entirely focused on something she had found there. From where James was standing, he couldn't see what she was barking at. He walked over to her and pet her, saying, "Daisy, it's okay. Everything is fine. You can calm down." Daisy, however, still did not stop barking. James could hear the panic in her bark. He was confused and curious about what made her so scared. He gently pushed her out of the way to take a look at what she had found, and when he saw it, he couldn't suppress his laugh. "Daisy, you crazy girl. That's just an old bee nest." He was very curious. James understood that Daisy didn't want him to open the nest, and he did not want to stress her out even more. However, her behavior had also made him extra curious. He told her, "Okay, I'll leave it as it is. Don't worry," and led her upstairs. He had to distract her. "It's time for lunch," he said, while he poured some food into her bowl. Daisy wagged her tail as she walked up to her bowl and eagerly started eating, almost inhaling her food. The stress had made her hungry, and she was now focused entirely on her meal. James used this perfect opportunity to back into the basement without Daisy noticing. He closed the door behind him so she wouldn't be able to follow him down, and walked over to his working table. He put on his gloves again and went back to work, cutting the nest further and further open. Minutes later, he finally heard a car on the driveway outside of his house, and he looked out of the window, relieved to see that it was a police car. 2 officers got out and quickly rang the doorbell, but James was already on his way to the door. The sooner he could take the officers into the basement, the better. He opened the door, already out of breath, and said, "Thank you so much for coming. Please come in," letting the officers inside his home. They followed him right to the basement door, where James came to a halt and turned around to look at them. "This is it," he said. "Let me lock Daisy away first, and then we can make our way downstairs." He lured Daisy into the kitchen with a toy and closed the door, locking her inside to keep her safe from the horror in his basement. "I'm sorry, Daisy, but it's better this way. Trust me." He quickly returned to the officers, who were still waiting for him by the basement door, and took a deep breath before pushing down the handle. He looked down at the stairs below him and slowly walked down, obviously afraid of what was waiting for him down there. Luckily, his colleague understood what he was trying to say without many words. Their job was very easy because James was making no attempt to leave the basement, but that was probably because he didn't even know that Animal Control wanted to speak with him. However, he would find out soon enough. Minutes later, the doorbell rang again, and Daisy started howling. James wanted to go upstairs to open the door, but Officer Martin quickly intervened. "It's all right. I will get it this time," he said, as he pushed his way past James and ran up the stairs. James and the other officer heard him greet the animal control officer upstairs and patiently waited for them to come down the stairs and finally enter the basement. "Follow me, right through here," Officer Martin said. And a few seconds later, he appeared on the doorstep again. When they arrived at the police station, James was brought to an interrogation room. He was told to wait there until the officers arrived, but he thought to himself, "Of course I'll wait here. Where else can I go?" He was getting more and more nervous. What was going on? When an officer finally entered the interrogation room, it became clear that James was in a lot of trouble. The officer had spoken to animal control, and if their suspicions proved to be correct, James could be locked up in jail for many, many years. This all came as a huge shock to him. In the following hours, James was asked many questions about that thing in his basement, and he answered them all truthfully. At first, the officers didn't believe him, but in the end they realized he was being honest. They had gotten it all by the wrong end. That same evening, James's street was filled with police cars with flashing lights. However, they hadn't come for James. He was back at home with Daisy, glad that the chaotic day had come to an end. No, the officers had come for James's neighbor. Why, you ask? James's neighbor had been trading illegal animals, and one of them had hidden in the nest in James's basement. You see, his neighbor was partaking in illegal activities. He was buying and selling very special and rare animal species and insects right in his basement. One of the animals had been a small scorpion, which had somehow managed to find a way into James's basement. There, it had found a comfortable hiding spot in the old nest, and that was why Daisy had been barking at it. It was a very special type of scorpion, and it was illegal to own it. That's why Tim immediately reacted that way when he saw it. Luckily, James was able to prove his innocence. Animal control took the scorpion and all of the other animals that James's neighbor owned, and the neighbor was arrested. James never forgot about the events of that day, and from then on, he always listened to Daisy whenever she tried to tell him something